Well, good morning. Good morning. Y'all remember Sister Doris Tootin coming in, and she would say, "Good morning, good morning, good morning." She always had a cheerful smile and a warm greeting. Miss Sister Doris and so many others, but I think of all the good memories. Glad you're here. Seems like crowds are picking up. Maybe we're getting back to normal. I hope so. And of course, it's springtime. Had a good storm last night, and hope everybody fared well. I know there was several warnings and watches that were in place, but I'm not aware of any damage that I know of, other than maybe some shingles or trees or something. So that's good. We were spared this particular storm, but I know Birmingham suffered and others, so we can always count our blessings, I guess. Glad you're here this morning, and I had to put the springtime picture on there because this morning the sun's out, and the storm's over, and the sun comes out, and it's just a new day, just like it is every day, and His mercies are new every morning. Aren't we thankful for that? Lamentations 3. So glad for His mercy. We're going to continue our class on how to be more like God, to be more like His Son. And there's a few more. I put a few more outlines of lesson 4 out in the back. We'll be doing it's on dedication and service to God. And probably this morning we won't get to that lesson outline because I've kind of prepared an introduction to this lesson, and hopefully it's beneficial to us. And this won't be from the Padfield lesson, actually the booklet, but it's just a lesson I kind of threw together that it really influenced me, and I hope it'll have an influence on you. But it's about our dedication and service to God. So many on our sick list, so many are improving and getting better, and we're glad for that. And I'm not going to go through the list. I just know Sister Beverly got to move to the rehab, and I know there's others that are making improvements and having procedures, and we just need to continue to remember all those in our prayer. I know there'll be more made mention, I'm sure, in our formal announcements. But before we begin our class this morning, we'll bow and have just a word of prayer. Well, before we do that, these flowers also remind us. Diane and I took a little trip to Natchez, Mississippi. And if you've never been, it's a good trip. Then they have a spring pilgrimage, and the azaleas are in bloom. They open up some of the homes, antebellum homes, and it's a real good trip with some beautiful flowers. And Bellingrath Gardens, if you've ever been down to Bellingrath Gardens, they're beautiful as well. But springtime is a wonderful time of the year, but I still think fall is my favorite. I like the fall. But well, before we begin class, let's have a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for all that you do for us, for the beauty of thy creation, the changing of the seasons, for your great love for us, and especially the sacrifice of thy Son that we might have forgiveness of sin. Thank you for loving us and caring for us, and for all that you do for us, for your watch, care, and safety over us. And thankful for our safety during these storms, and we pray for those that were affected, and their needs might be met, things might be well with them. Always grateful that we can assemble on the first day of the week, first for a period of Bible study, and then our period of worship unto Thee. And grateful for our teachers, those that are standing before classes and willing to teach thy word. Pray you might continue to bless them. And just so thankful for all the members of Valdosta. Pray you might always have that desire to serve thee and to be dedicated unto thee and to live our lives pleasing and acceptable unto thee. Thank you for this great country in which we live. We continue to pray for it, pray for the leaders. They may do those things that'll be pleasing unto thee, and help us that we might always have freedoms to worship you freely and not be afraid of man in any way. Thank you for loving us. Thank you again for the time we have together. Continue to be with all those that are struggling, and help us to help in any way that we can. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right, we're going to kind of introduce, and probably I think Matt's in the booth. I probably won't get to the lesson dedication, so you can put on live stream whatever you want to, Matt. But I put a picture in there, but probably won't get to the outline. But we'll get there as far as we can anyway. This lesson 4 is dedication to the Lord, and it is a it's a tough lesson because it's one that okie dokie. Let me try this one more time. I hate it when you have problems. Let's see if it comes up. Or maybe my HDMI. Check transmitter. Well, let me check it in the floor. Oh, there it is. Had a little weak link there. So it's an interesting lesson because, you know, dedication is sometimes hard to measure. You know, how do we examine ourselves and how do we know if we are dedicated to God? And so sometimes it's hard to put a number on. And hopefully, as we go through this introduction to dedication, we can kindly see some examples from the Bible. Well, you know, we ask ourselves, are we free to serve God as we choose? Do we have a commitment to God? Do we have anything that we owe and not? Owe is always a bad choice of words, but it's the best I can come up with right now. But as we look about dedication, we're going to look at our some biblical examples to help us understand what dedication is. And of course, this is not an exhaustive study, but the Bible, I've always said, the Bible best, is its best interpreter. It explains itself. And so we're going to look at, this morning, going to look at personal commitment and our personal commitment to God. And then to find out, do we measure up? You know, how can we measure up? We can look at our lives and see. The Webster's Dictionary defines religion, and that's what we say that we practice, and there's different types of religion, but it says in point 1a, it's the state of being religious. And so it's as you're being religious, and the biblical definition is religion to bind back to God. Supposedly we're lost and be bound back to God. We practice, and that's in the Christian religion. There are so many other different kind of religions. But Webster says the service and worship of God are the supernatural. So there are folks that are religious that may not be religious toward God, but yet they have a religion, toward different objects, different gods, different superstitions, and yet they claim to be religious. So it's the service and worship of God or the supernatural. And it's interesting that, it seemed like since man has begun, he has always had that hunger, that desire inside to worship something or someone. And if we're not led in the right direction, taught through the Scriptures, then we end up just like they did as Paul was preaching at Mars Hill. We have unknown God, and to all the other 3,000 other gods they had, but yet, and even the Indians, we look back at the Native Americans, and they worshiped, they had the spirits, the nature and the animals, and yet they worshiped something, even though they didn't realize that it was God that they were supposed to worship. But then in B2, it's a commitment or devotion to religious faith or observance. So that's why we're here today, is our commitment and devotion, to worship God in spirit and truth, as we're commanded to. And yet the object of our devotion is God the Father and the Trinity, and so that we're not worshiping superstitions or Greek gods or mythological imaginations or anything like that, but yet we're worshiping the one true God. And number 2 says a personal set or institutionalized system of religious attitudes, beliefs, and practices. So there's many use manuals, creeds, catechisms, and other different methods to conduct their worship, but yet ours is the Bible and the Bible alone, and to actually try to do that spirit and truth that's pleasing unto God. And then the archaic form is scrupulous conformity. And there's some that very dedicated and some that are very dedicated to their religion and to who they worship, and it's conscientiousness. They're very aware. They don't go through life just haphazardly, but they're very conscious of how they are worshiping, whatever they're worshiping. But as applies to Christians, we need to be conscientious about our worship to God. And then number 4 says a cause, principle, or system of belief held to with ardor, and that ardor is extreme vigor, enthusiasm. It's a lot of energy, and as we worship and as we practice religion, we need to have it with intensity and zeal and loyalty, and it's real similar. We're going to see some similar words. It's going to be similar to faith, these synonyms. We're going to look at faith and dedication and devotion and see how they interact with each other, intermingle with each other. Synonyms for religion will be devotion, dedication, faith, piety. And so that's how we're going to be looking at this. And when we talk about faith, we're just talking about the faith, Hebrews 11:6, that we're to have. But yet it's our commitment to God. So as we look, also the definition of dedication and devotion, and this is from I think it's Smith's Bible Dictionary, one of them. But anyway, it's a religion, an act or rite of dedicating. So see, there's the word we're looking for, to dedicate. It's an act or rite of dedicating to a divine being or a sacred use. And of course, we know that everybody, everybody doesn't worship spirit and truth, but we're looking at how we're supposed to be worshipped. And it's such as the dedication of the temple, and we'll have more to say about that a little bit later on about the temple. And then point 2 is devoting or setting aside for a particular purpose. That is the dedication of funds raised from the bake sale to a class trip. So it's dedicated for a particular purpose, and when you look at it from the Christian standpoint, it's the same as sanctified. And when I say not the same, it's the similar definition. To be sanctified, to sanctify, and that's to be consecrated, set apart for a godly service, and such as the vessels of the tabernacle. They were sanctified, and they were set apart only for the service of God and not for anything else. And so as the Bible speaks of sanctification, as we apply it to ourselves, we're His chosen people that are set apart for a godly service. And then there's also dedication or devotion, a name and often a message prefixed to a literary, musical, or artistic production, dedicated to the memory of a highway or a building or something. Something can be dedicated to someone's memory. And, as the Christian, we're dedicated to God, and hopefully that our light shines so that He gets the glory from our dedication. And then point number 4 is self-sacrificing, devotion, loyalty. That is, our dedication to the cause required hard work and dedication. So we're to be loyal to God, and we're to be busy and hard working. And then there's it should define our lifestyle and even our service unto God. And then point number 5, a ceremony to mark the official completion or reopening of something, such as a building or something like that. So the word dedication can be used in, many different ways, but yet, we're looking at it from the Christian standpoint. How are we to be dedicated and devoted to God? And with those definitions that we need to be energetic and zealous and all those good things, we need to see how we should be dedicated to God. So we're going to look at a few examples of dedication and how they were, how the Bible at least explains or tries to help us to understand dedication. And, when you start with the tabernacle, and you remember the tabernacle, it was set apart for a godly service. It was set apart for men to approach God, God to approach man as God would enter the most holy area of the tabernacle, and it followed them throughout the wilderness. They packed the tabernacle and moved it, but yet the tabernacle itself, they didn't just build it and then allow men to, God had a pattern and a plan, and then it was dedicated, and it was Hebrews. Let's see what this is. Numbers 7:1. It came to pass on the day that Moses had fully set up the tabernacle and had anointed it and sanctified it, and there's that word similar dedication, and all the instruments thereof, both the altar and all the vessels thereof, and had anointed them and sanctified them. And so it's prepared for a godly service. In Hebrews 9:22, moreover, he sprinkled the blood both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry, referring back to Moses. And so it's sanctified, but yet Hebrews 9:22 says almost all things are by the law purged with blood, and without shedding of blood is no remission. So it's important to recognize that a sacrifice is required, a bloody sacrifice is required, not like Cain's worship, but yet a bloody sacrifice. And matter of fact, Christianity is sometimes referred to as a bloody religion. When you look at the countless numbers of animal sacrifices that were offered to God back during the 1500, 2,000 years that they followed the law of Moses, about 1,500 years. Look at the number of sacrifices that were made, and that should just stress to us the significance of a sacrifice, and also the significance of the blood that was shed, and then tell us how bad sin is. It separates us from God, and look at what it requires to bring us into a right relationship, knowing that in the Old Testament, under the law of Moses, we're looking forward to that blood of Christ. But yet, the sacrifices were still there. Revelation 1:5 says, unto him that loved us and washed us from our sins in his own blood. So as we look at the dedication, you look at Solomon's, the tabernacle was dedicated. Not only that, but that Solomon's temple was dedicated. David made preparations for building the temple, but he being a man of war, the Bible says he had bloody hands. Solomon was chosen to build the temple. And then when the temple was completed, if you look at the sheer number of sacrifices that were offered, 2 Chronicles 7 and verse 5, King Solomon offered a sacrifice of 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. And so the king and all the people dedicated the house of God. And so you see the great value that was placed on the temple, which was where God was to dwell with his people. And so you see the value that was placed, and yet look at the sacrifice and dedication that was required. And then after Solomon's prayer of dedication, there was that long prayer. Then it says in 1 Kings 8:62, and the king and all Israel with him offered sacrifice before the Lord. And so the idea was, and the prayer of Solomon was, lead us, let us follow you and help us. But if we go astray, we know you're going to turn your back on us. And so the temple itself was dedicated. And not only that, we're all familiar with the Hall of the Faithful, Hebrews chapter 11, and it's sometimes called the Hall of Faith. and it lists, and we're not going to go through all the Hall of Faith this morning, but we're going to look at just a few of them, and it's the faithful examples of those who followed God and dedicated their lives and service to Him by following His will. And so you can look at, as you read through the Hall of Faith, you can look at their actions and their service and what they did and see how they led lives of dedication to God. They were faithful to God in His commandments and all that He commanded him. And the scoffers and unbelievers, Noah's Ark. Look at what it said about Noah. Hebrews 11:7, by faith Noah, being warned of God of things not seen, moved with fear, prepared an ark. Where is dedication in this verse? It's the preparing of the ark that Noah is building according to the pattern, what God has said, and it's prepared to an ark the saving of his house, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. And of course, Noah did that. He followed God's pattern and God's plan to a T. He followed it to a T, and then he built the ark to save the world, supposedly, and only ended up his family. And by the way, if you haven't had opportunity, the Ark Encounter up in Kentucky, we have plans maybe to go this week if things work out. But there's a great a replica of the Ark in Kentucky that it's an interesting. Diane and I have been, but I think we want to take kids. But if you get a chance to go, it's worth going just to go and view the enormity and the size of the ark, and realizing that Noah prepared this, and the length of time to build the ark it's debated by many. Regardless, but God was long suffering with man. 1 Peter says he was 3:20 said the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was preparing, and so God was long suffering. And my contention opinion, he worked over 100 years. Go back to Genesis 6:3, and he actually he was a preacher of righteousness. He was doing those 2 Peter 2:5, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. So was Noah, you asked the question, was Noah dedicated? Was Noah zealously serving? And for the time it took to build the ark, he was very zealous, and of course he got the job done and saved his family. And if we could all just save our family, wouldn't that be wonderful? That would be just great. We want to save everybody, but if we could just save our family. And so the ark is an example of Noah's dedication to God. And then look at Abraham. Abraham was dedicated to God. Hebrews 11 verse 8, by faith, Abraham, when he was called, we talked about our calling, a couple of weeks ago, when he was called to go out into a place where he should, after receive for an inheritance, obeyed. What does dedication involve? Dedication involves hearing God's call through His Word, and then obeyed, and he went out not knowing whether he went. Can you imagine the dedication, faith it took? I tried to Google and get an exact length of the journey from Ur all the way over to Egypt and then back to Canaan. As you see, he started in Ur and he goes up and makes the journey, comes through and goes over to Egypt and then back up to Canaan. So I tried to figure that out, and I even looked at the scale right there. It's well over 1,000, maybe 1,500 miles, and I saw one source that said 7,000 miles. I don't believe that, but yet it's a long journey, and they traveled either by walk or donkey or how they motivated, but yet he did all that. Well, was Abraham, was he dedicated? And you have to say, yes, he was. He fathered Isaac, the seed line through which Messiah would come, even at an old age. he saw the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, can you imagine? Abraham was there when, matter of fact, you know, the angels appeared to him and told him about Sodom and Gomorrah, and he saw that. But look at his faithfulness, that he remained faithful to God unto death. Revelation 2:10, and he made many mistakes. You know, you can actually look at his life, and he made many mistakes, but all in all, his faithfulness to God showed through in his life and attitude toward God. And the one that's really interesting to me was David's mighty men. And Byron had just finished a study on the life of David, and he spent quite some time on lessons of David's mighty men, of lessons that we can learn from his mighty men. And these were the mighty men of valor, and they were a group of men. Some say 30. If you do the study, as many as 38. But these were men who were totally dedicated to serving David. Their whole goal in their life was to serve King David. And of course, we serve no man. You know, we serve God. But yet, you know, I would to God we had that dedication that these mighty men of valor had. And 2 Samuel 23, 8 through 39, and 1 Chronicles 11, 10 through 47. I'm going to blow that up. God chose David to rule his nation of Israel, and David was a skilled warrior, and remember Goliath, but he got by with a little help from his friends. And from this website is kind of a children's website, or it's real simple, if you will. But these are men who supported David militarily and politically. Their loyalty and impressive combat feats gained them honor and renown in David's kingdom. And here's an overview. The three champions, and these were three mighty men that stood out from all the others. And there was Jeshabim, he was chief of the captains. He killed 800 men at once with his spear. And of course, knowing that David was a bloody man, a man of war and battle, and he did a lot of conquering and fighting, but yet his men stood beside him. And this one mighty man in battle for David killed over 800 men at once with his spear. And then there was Shammah. He defended the plot of barley from an entire camp of Philistines. So he reminded you of Rambo, I guess. You know, he defended a field of barley, but he did it because he was dedicated to David. And then that middle guy, Eleazar, he fought along with David until his hand clung to the sword. Him and David, you can imagine standing, back to back or side to side or whatever, and fought so long that he could not release his sword. His hand had cramped around his sword, and he couldn't release it. But yet he stood back to back with David, and they fought, and he fought till he couldn't even turn his sword loose. And you know, that's dedication. That's I know that's from a commercial or something, but it just reminds me of his hand clinging to the sword and not being able to turn it loose. But then there was also a couple of more dedicated to God, the 30, and there was not strictly 30, but there was 3. David had a craving for water, and I know you remember this story. He had a craving for water from a certain well in enemy territory, an autonomous squad, and I know it was David said 2 Samuel 23, 15 and 16, and David longed and said, "Oh, that one would give me a drink of the water of the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." And the 3 mighty men break through the host of Philistines, drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink thereof, but poured it out unto the Lord. David was dedicated to God, but these men were dedicated to David. They risked their lives simply because he wanted to drink from that wall that well of Bethlehem. And then there was another one, Abishai. He killed 300 men and the son of a giant. And then Benaiah, he was captain of David's guard. He killed 2 Moabite heroes, an Egyptian giant, and a lion, and helped Solomon secure the throne after David died. And so it's easy to see how the dedication of these men, how does that apply to us as a Christian? How dedicated are we to be, to God? How dedicated do we be to the Christianity and to the following and the spreading of the gospel? And these 3 risked their lives for David, and are we willing to, dedicate ourselves to serving God? And look at the apostles, disciples. Look how they were dedicated to Jesus. All of them died the death of a martyr except John. John would die of natural causes, but yet Andrew was crucified. This is all according to history. This is according to history. The Bible doesn't give us all this, but according to history, Andrew was crucified. Bartholomew was beaten and crucified. James, the son of Alphaeus, he was stoned to death. The son of Zebedee was beheaded. John was exiled for his faith and died of old age. Judas, not Iscariot, was stoned to death. Matthew was speared to death. Peter crucified upside down. Philip was crucified. Simon crucified. Thomas was speared to death. Matthias was stoned to death. And this is from Fox Book of Martyrs. I don't know if it's all gospel truth, but it makes sense to me. And one of the greatest evidences for Christianity is that the apostles were willing to die. How many folks would be willing to stand up and lose their life for a fraud, for a hoax, if Christianity wasn't true, and if Christ didn't come and die upon the cross? How many people would give their lives that to follow a hoax? But yet it's even even history says that Saul was beheaded by the Romans. But yet 1 Peter 2:21 says, "For here even unto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow in his footsteps." So what about Revelation 2:10? Does it really mean unto death, or is that just until I die of old age? Of course, we know what it means: dedication and service to God. But then the main example, the example that stands out is the dedication of Jesus the Christ to the Father. All we have to do is look at what he did, and as he was crucified, and it's all according to the will of the Father. He was following God's will. And he was buried, and he was resurrected, and it's that same pattern is what we follow today. So many folks want to negate baptism or do away with baptism or not believe in baptism, but the gospel reenacted is just as Christ died on the cross, we're to die to self and sin and Satan, and just like Christ was buried, we're to be buried in that watery grave of baptism, and then just as Christ rose to ascend to the Father's side, then we're to be raised to walk in newness of life, and that includes dedication. That's part of that dedication. And so we're raised to walk in newness of life, and so that we too can ascend to the Father when that day of judgment comes. So Romans 5 and verse 8, God commended his love toward us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And so it's kind of we begin to ask ourselves, well, am I dedicated? How do I know if I'm dedicated? And if you actually look, and this is, as I've studied these examples and many others that go through in the Bible, it seems like you have to conclude that dedication and faithfulness are directly proportional to the value placed upon the person or object of our dedication. And so when it's all said and done, is we're going to be religious. whether it's the worship of ourselves, or whether it's the worship of a superstitious God, or to, man is going to be religious. But when we, I want to say the right words, when we realize the great value that God had for His Son, and the precious blood of Christ that was shed on the cross for us, yet while we were yet sinners, then we have to ask ourselves, is my dedication and faithfulness proportional to the value placed upon His death? We love Him because He first loved us. He gave Himself for us. And so, is our dedication, are we dedicated with the proper proportion to serving God? We ask ourselves, how can our dedication be measured? Is there an instrument or a thermometer or a barometer that measures our devotion? I've often asked myself, why was Paul so dedicated? Why were David's mighty men so dedicated? Why would the apostles die? What did they have that, and I say that I don't have, I do have, but yet I don't have, is their desire to serve God. It's to serve Him faithfully, serve Him unto death, and it seems this is a hard point to get across because it sounds one way and it doesn't always come out right. But Paul considered himself chief of sinners. He considered himself the greatest sinner of all time. And so when Christ appeared to him on the road to Damascus, and he was blinded and forgiven of his sins after he had obeyed the gospel, his life was one of service and dedication to God. And I personally believe because he felt he was the chief of sinners. He felt that God had forgiven him of so much, of murder and hailing men and women and putting them in prison. And he realized that he was the chief of sinners, and that what God did for him was just, he had to pay, and I say here's what I'm talking about, not pay God back, but he had to demonstrate his dedication to God for what he had done for him. Sin, it only takes one sin. It's not, you don't have to be the chief of sinners, and you don't have to be the most evil, vile person in history, but if you just recognize, as the Bible teaches, that one sin separates us from God, and that one sin is enough to cast us into condemnation, cast us into hell. And so, even though Paul was, he considered himself to be the chief of sinners, he served God. And the apostles, I don't know their reasoning, but how is it that some are more dedicated than others are? I don't think I have this on the screen, and it's I think we've got just a minute. Look at, if you turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 7 and begin at verse 36. It's Luke chapter 7 and verse 36. And Jesus is teaching in parables and instructions. And it began at 36, and one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. Verse 37, and behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment, in verse 38, and stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears. So this was a lady, she was a sinner. Many try to make her a prostitute or a harlot. The Bible doesn't tell that. The word can mean a heathen, a Gentile or a heathen. She was a sinner, but yet she was her life wasn't right with God, that's for sure. And so she brought the alabaster box in verse 38, and she began weeping and began to wash his feet with tears, and to wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. Now when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, spake within himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, talking about Christ, he would have known who and what manner of woman this is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answering said unto him, Simon, I have somewhat to say to thee. And he said, Master, say on. Verse 41, there was a certain creditor which had two debtors. The one owed 500 pence and the other owed 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which one of them will love him the most? Which one will love him the most? And he said unto him, and Simon answered, said, I suppose that he to whom he forgave most. There's Paul. Look at Paul. He forgave most. And he said unto him, Thou hast rightly judged. He turned to the woman and said unto Simon, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house, and seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house, and thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she hath washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. And thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman, since that dedication, that service, but this woman that hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but the woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. So you can see the reciprocal of that. Little is forgiven, the same loveth little. And of course, I'm sure that's referring back to the Pharisee, I guess, in his thinking. But yet, much is given, then the love increases, because you know that what God has done for you. So I don't know. I don't know what we need to recognize our sinfulness, where we would be without the blood of Christ. We need to recognize that great value and sacrifice that Christ made, and mention this Romans 12, 1 and 2, and we'll continue to mention it throughout our study, is to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable God, which is your reasonable service. How can I measure my dedication? Be not conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's through the Word of God. So you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And so it's important to recognize that we do owe God a dedication, a service. And Titus 2, verse 11 through 14, and just to summarize, because this will actually be in our lesson next week. Our next week will be our gospel meeting, so it'll be the following week. But Titus writes, Paul writes to Titus, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. And so I don't know how to measure. We have to measure our lives through the mirror. We talked about that mirror, and we look at ourselves in the mirror, and do we measure up to God's Word? Are we truly dedicated to God, or what do we call ourselves? Pew Christians. We're ones that come in and sit on the pew, and are we really interested in saving souls? And and only I can answer for me, and only you can answer for you. And so when we get into our lesson next week on dedication and devotion, hopefully this background will show us what are we talking about. The Bible is very plain and explicit on what God requires. Love the Lord thy God with all your heart, soul, mind. He requires it all. He's God of all, or God of none. So we're gonna stop there. I know the bell hadn't rung, but open the floor. You open questions and comments. You can, if I don't hear them, somebody respond to them. Any questions or comments on dedication and devotion? Peter says we're redeemed with that precious blood of Christ. Well, how precious is it to us? How dedicated are we? And again, we talked about the abundant life earlier, that we're supposed to have an abundant life, and it doesn't mean that, that we can't have a life of family and work and recreation and all those things, but yet, what is it? I've heard several sermons. Keep first things first. We got to keep our priority right, first things first. And we've got an opportunity next week, the gospel meeting to be here, and hopefully, I know COVID has got us all. Oh, yeah. Sometimes they put Christianity to shame, as we think anyway. It's a yeah, they work and dedication and then we have to ask what how can we build that dedication? What do we need to do? And that's dig into the Word. That's the most important thing. The Word have I hid in my heart that I might not sin against Thee. And we just have to. So that this lesson is really working on this lesson. It has really hit me. What about this COVID mess? I'm just saying. What about it? Have we really given our all to God, or maybe we just maybe we sit back in a recliner? I don't know. That's the question every person has to answer for themselves. And I know I could have done better. I know I can do better. And so if this lesson helps no one, go ahead, Adam. I'm sorry. Right. Yeah, I agree. Different talent. It's but the dedication is how we use even that one talent. Whatever it is, we can show our dedication. Whatever that talent is, we can show that I'm doing this. And I think in our next lesson it talks about as we do anything, do it as it unto the Lord. We need to whatever we do, we're doing it as unto the Lord. Well, I know the bell's fixing to ring, and I hope this helped you. If this lesson helped nobody else, it helped me because I need to be more dedicated, and hopefully we'll all continue to grow